My father rolled his eyes when I stepped into the courtroom, that familiar look of disappointment crossing his weathered face like it always had. But then the judge lifted his head from the papers, his eyes locking onto me. His expression froze. In a voice barely above a whisper yet carrying through the sudden hush, he said, "Is that her?" The entire courtroom went silent. Lawyers paused mid-sentence. The clerk stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. My father's smug expression wavered for the first time in years. They had no idea who I really was or what I had carried with me into that room. They thought I was just another retired officer, a daughter finally confronting her stubborn old man. What they didn't know was that I had lived long enough, fought hard enough, and remembered everything. Every morning on the Harlan family farm in rural Iowa began the same way for decades. I rose before dawn just as my father had taught me the chill of the Midwest air, cutting through the old wooden house my great-grandfather built after World War II. The smell of strong black coffee would fill the kitchen while I checked the fences in my mind, even when I was half a world away in uniform. My late mother, God rest her soul, used to say the land had a way of holding on to people. My father, Colonel James Harlan, retired, believed it held on to duty above all else. He raised me like a soldier, not a daughter. There were no hugs after scraped knees, only push-ups. No tears allowed, only more laps around the barn. "Harlans don't break," he would bark, his voice sharp as the medals pinned to his chest from Vietnam. My life wasn't one of softness. It was rhythm of orders deployments, and proving myself in rooms full of men who doubted a woman could lead. I poured 32 years into the United States Army, rising to Colonel Margaret Harlan, commanding units in Iraq and Afghanistan, making decisions that kept soldiers alive, while my own family slowly drifted away. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and the slow unraveling of my marriage. My 2 children barely knew me beyond the woman in the crisp uniform who called on holidays. All of it, I told myself, was to earn the respect of the man sitting across the courtroom, now the same man who once pinned my first lieutenant bars on my shoulders, with a nod instead of pride. That crisp October morning 2 months ago was supposed to be different. I had driven 8 hours from Washington back to the farm after my retirement ceremony, the weight of my duffel bag, nothing compared to the exhaustion in my bones. The golden fields of Iowa stretched endlessly under the autumn sky, the corn harvested, leaving stubble that crunched beneath my boots. I found my father in the living room, surrounded by stacks of papers. His once powerful frame now slightly stooped, but his eyes still sharp as bayonets. "Margaret," he said flatly, not even rising from William's old oak desk. "You're early. I'm home, Dad. For good this time." I set my cover on the table, the brass eagle catching the light. I wanted to tell him how proud I was of the life I'd built, how I had honored the Harlan name in ways he never imagined. Instead, he slid a folder toward me. "The farm is too much for you now. You've been gone too long. I've made arrangements with a developer. We sell, I move to the veterans' home in Cedar Rapids, and you need help, Maggie. The Army broke something in you. Everyone sees it but you." My hands tightened on the edge of the desk. The wood was worn smooth by generations of Harlans. "This land is our legacy, Dad. Mom's buried here. I won't let you erase that." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Legacy? You don't even have a family anymore. Your kids barely speak to you. I'm doing what's best." The weeks that followed were a blur of cold arguments and legal papers. My father, the man who taught me duty and honor, had quietly begun proceedings to declare me mentally unfit to manage the estate, citing PTSD and unstable behavior from my service. He wanted control, wanted to sell the one place that still tied us to something real. I stood in that old kitchen, the scent of pine cleaner and aged wood filling my lungs, staring at the man who had shaped me into steel and now wanted to melt me down. I didn't cry. Harlans don't cry. Instead, I made calls, I gathered records, and I waited. Now here we were. In the Woodbury County Courthouse, the American flag hanging heavy behind the judge's bench, its stars and stripes a silent witness. I sat straight-backed in my charcoal suit, my silver hair pulled into a tight bun, medals replaced by quiet dignity. My father, dressed in his old uniform jacket, despite the retirement, glared at me with the same contempt he'd shown when I chose West Point over staying home to be a proper woman. The judge, an older man with kind but weary eyes, cleared his throat. The silence stretched. I met my father's gaze across the aisle, and for the first time in my life I didn't look away first. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. I had lived in the shadow of his expectations for 54 years. I had sacrificed everything to make him proud. And now, with the truth I had uncovered in the old barn, safe hidden beneath decades of dust, I was ready to show Colonel James Harlan exactly who his daughter had become. Those words from the judge hung in the air like smoke after a rifle shot, but my mind had already drifted back through the decades, pulled by the weight of my father's stare. The courtroom faded, and I was 12 years old again, standing in the freezing Iowa wind behind the barn, tears streaming down my face after I had fallen from the hayloft and broken my wrist. My father loomed over me, his shadow long and unforgiving in the late afternoon light. "Soldiers don't cry, Margaret," he snapped, his voice cutting sharper than the pain in my arm. "You want to be weak like your mother, or do you want to be a Harlan?" I bit my lip until it bled, swallowing the sobs as he made me run laps around the property until the sun disappeared behind the cornfields. That was the day I learned that love in our house was measured in endurance, not affection. My younger brother Ethan was the golden child. 2 years my junior, he had our father's broad shoulders and easy confidence. Dad pushed him just as hard, but there was pride in his voice when Ethan excelled. I was the one who had to prove I belonged. When Ethan died at 19 during a training accident at Fort Benning, a faulty parachute that never should have happened, something in my father shattered. He never spoke of it directly. Instead, he poured all his remaining expectations onto me. "You carry both your burdens and his," now he told me at the graveside, the folded flag heavy in my hands. I was 17. That night I enlisted in my heart long before I ever signed the papers. The years blurred into a relentless march. West Point, commissioning, deployments that took me from the dusty streets of Baghdad to the mountains of Afghanistan. I rose through the ranks, not because it was easy for a woman, but because I refused to give my father any reason to doubt me. I missed Ethan's would-be wedding. I missed my own daughter's first steps. My marriage to David crumbled under the weight of long absences and unspoken resentments. "You're more married to the army and to proving something to that old man than you ever were to me," he said the day he left. I didn't argue. How could I when he was right? When I finally retired 6 months ago, the farm should have been a refuge. Instead, it felt like stepping back into a battlefield I had never truly left. The old white farmhouse still smelled of polished oak gun oil and the faint trace of my mother's lavender sachets that Dad refused to throw away. The screen door creaked, the same familiar protest as I stepped inside. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, newspapers spread before him, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold. "You're back," he said without looking up. No welcome, no hug, just that flat acknowledgement. "I'm staying, Dad. This is home," he snorted. "Home. You've been a ghost here for 30 years. Now you think you can just walk in and take over." The argument started small and grew like Iowa thunderstorms, sudden, fierce, and destructive. He criticized everything: the way I made coffee, how I left my boots by the door, my soft posture after years behind a desk instead of in the field. But beneath the petty jabs lay something darker. I began noticing missing documents, late-night phone calls, and unfamiliar cars pulling up the long gravel drive. When I confronted him, he waved me off. "You've got that look in your eyes again, Maggie, the one that says the war followed you home. The VA doctors warned me about this. PTSD, unstable. You're not fit to run this place." I stared at him, the man who had taught me to compartmentalize pain, now using my service against me. Within weeks I learned he had hired a lawyer from Des Moines and was quietly petitioning the court to have me declared incompetent. Worse, he had been in talks with a veterans organization he helped found, one he quietly controlled, to transfer the farm's deed upon his death or incapacity. The land my great-grandfather had cleared with his own hands, where my mother planted her rose garden. Where Ethan and I had raced through the tall grass as children. He wanted to sell pieces of it to developers while funneling the rest into his legacy project, all while painting me as the broken daughter who couldn't be trusted. One cold evening after another tense dinner where neither of us spoke, I waited until he went to bed. The barn was dark and musty, filled with the scent of old hay and motor oil. I climbed into the loft where I used to hide as a girl, and found the small metal box bolted beneath a loose floorboard, exactly where my mother had once shown me years before she took her own life on a rainy April night when I was 14. Inside were yellowed letters, bank statements, and a worn leather journal. As I read by the beam of my flashlight, my hands began to tremble. My father had not been merely surviving on his pension. He had built something far larger in secret, and he had spent decades ensuring I would never inherit it. The betrayal burned hotter than any desert sun I had faced overseas. This was not just about land or money. This was about a lifetime of being measured, judged, and ultimately discarded by the one man I had spent my entire life trying to impress. In that moment, kneeling in the dust of my childhood, something shifted inside me. Colonel Margaret Harlan was no longer the obedient daughter. She was done waiting for approval that would never come. I closed the box, wiped the dust from my hands, and walked back to the house under a sky heavy with stars. My father had taught me many things: discipline, resilience, and the cost of weakness. Now I would use every lesson he had drilled into me. I would fight him with the same cold precision he had always demanded. And when the time came, he would finally understand the depth of the silence he had built between us. That night, after my father's heavy footsteps had faded up the creaking stairs, I returned to the barn with a small crowbar and a determination colder than the Iowa wind rattling the tin roof. The old metal box came free with a protesting groan, its surface rough with rust and years of neglect. I carried it to the kitchen table under the single hanging bulb, its warm yellow light casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The scent of aged paper and faint gun oil rose as I lifted the lid. Inside lay the hidden life of Colonel James Harlan, a man far more calculating than the gruff, pension-dependent father he pretended to be. Page after page revealed a meticulously built empire. Bank statements from accounts I had never known existed showed investments in defense contracting firms' land holdings across the Midwest, and even shares in a private security company founded by old Vietnam comrades. The numbers made my military pension look like pocket change. For decades, while he lectured me about duty and sacrifice, he had quietly turned his military connections into substantial wealth. There were letters from generals and senators thanking him for discreet assistance on procurement deals. He had been pulling strings from the shadows long after his uniform came off. But the deepest cut came from a sealed envelope addressed to me in his precise slanted handwriting. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the pages dated 5 years earlier, never sent. Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm gone, or you've gone digging where you shouldn't. You always were too stubborn for your own good. I built this for the Harlan name, not for weakness. Your service was adequate, but a woman commanding men in combat was always a risk I tried to mitigate. A quiet word here, a delayed promotion there, it was for your own protection as much as the Army's. Ethan would have carried the legacy properly. You fight like a Harlan, but you feel too much just like your mother. The words blurred. I had suspected, but seeing it in his handwriting drove the knife deeper. He had sabotaged me. The promotion I lost to a less qualified officer in 2012, the command position that mysteriously went to someone else in Afghanistan, his doing. All while I was thousands of miles away trying to earn his respect through blood and sweat. Deeper in the box were hospital records and a private investigator's report. My mother hadn't died in a simple accident, as he had always claimed. She had taken her own life after years of emotional isolation and verbal cruelty. The report detailed nights of her crying alone while he drank in the study, berating her for producing a soft daughter, and then losing his precious son. She had left a note he had destroyed begging him to show me kindness. Rage, pure and focused, settled in my chest like a well-aimed round. This wasn't just greed or control. This was a lifetime of systematic diminishment. The man who taught me honor had none when it came to his own family. He wanted to erase my place in this legacy and rewrite the story with himself as the sole guardian of the Harlan name. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I photographed every document with my secure phone, then carefully returned the originals. By dawn, as the first light painted the frost-covered fields in soft gold, I was on the phone with Captain Rebecca Torres, my former JAG officer and one of the few people I still trusted completely. "Colonel Harlan," she said, her voice sharp, even at 6 a.m. "This is heavy: financial manipulation, undue influence, possible elder fraud on his part. And those blocked promotions border on illegal command influence. I know some people. We can build a case." Over the following weeks, I moved carefully, like planning a complex operation. I met with a respected estate lawyer in Des Moines, a man who had served in the same theater as my father. I reached out to 2 retired generals who remembered me not as James Harlan's daughter, but as a capable commander in my own right. Slowly, the pieces of my counteroffensive came together. I learned my father had been liquidating smaller assets without disclosure, and had significant gambling debts from discreet trips to casinos in Minnesota, debts he planned to cover by forcing the sale of prime farmland. The veterans organization he championed. It was little more than a shell that would funnel proceeds back into his personal accounts, while he played the role of noble patriot. Every revelation hardened my resolve. I sat on the old wooden porch one evening wrapped in my mother's faded quilt, the scent of wood smoke from the neighbor's chimney drifting on the air. The same porch where my father once taught me to salute properly at age 6. I watched him through the window as he reviewed papers at the desk, his shoulders slightly hunched now, age finally catching the man who refused to bend. He still saw me as that crying 12-year-old girl. He had no idea I had become something far more dangerous, a woman who had learned his lessons better than he ever intended. I had spent my career outmaneuvering enemies who underestimated me. Now I would apply that same precision at home. The court date had been set. My father believed he was walking into a simple competency hearing to sideline his difficult daughter. He had no idea I was bringing an entire hidden war chest into that courtroom. Documents, financial trails, witness statements from people he thought loyal only to him. As I prepared my uniform for the hearing, not the dress blues but a tailored civilian suit that still carried the posture of command, I felt a strange calm. This wasn't just about saving the farm anymore. This was about forcing my father to confront every lie he had told himself about our family, about me, and about the kind of man he truly was. He wanted a war. I would give him one he would never forget. The courtroom air felt thick with anticipation as we returned from recess, the wooden benches creaking under the weight of scattered spectators. My father sat rigidly at his table, his old uniform jacket pressed sharp metals gleaming under the fluorescent lights, as if they could shield him from what was coming. He glanced at me with that familiar mix of disdain and confidence, the same look he had given me before every inspection growing up. He still believed this was his territory, his rules, his victory. I kept my face, impassive hands folded calmly on the table, the faint scent of polished wood and paper files grounding me like the Iowa soil after rain. Judge Anderson called the session to order. My father's lawyer began with practiced smoothness, painting me as the unstable daughter scarred by war, a woman whose long absences had broken her family and left her unfit to manage the historic Harlan farm. Colonel Harlan Sr. has only his daughter's best interests at heart, the lawyer claimed. This is about protecting the family legacy. I rose slowly when it was my turn, every movement deliberate, the way I had entered briefing rooms in Kandahar. Rebecca Torres stood beside me, but this moment was mine. I placed a thick binder on the bench and met the judge's eyes. "Your Honor, my father taught me honor, duty, and truth. Today I bring all 3. One by one I presented the documents, financial records showing secret accounts, proof of unauthorized land sales, the investigator's report on my mother's death, and finally copies of the letters where he admitted interfering with my career. The courtroom grew deathly quiet. My father's face drained of color as I read aloud from the unsent letter, my voice steady but carrying the weight of every sacrificed year. You fight like a Harlan, but you feel too much, just like your mother. Those are your words, Dad, written in your own hand. While I was leading troops under fire, you were pulling strings to keep me from advancing. While I was earning these, I touched the spot where my ribbons would have been. You were planning to erase me from our family's story. James Harlan rose halfway from his chair, his hand trembling. Margaret, that's enough. You're twisting things. I protected this family. Protected. My voice cracked for the first time, not from weakness, but from the raw surge of decades of pain. You broke Mom. You broke Ethan's memory by making me carry him like a burden instead of a brother. And you tried to break me, all so you could control the narrative of the great Colonel Harlan. The judge called for order, but the dam had broken. My father's lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. I continued laying out how I had already quietly purchased the notes on the smaller parcels he tried to sell, and secured liens on the rest. The farm wasn't going anywhere without my consent. Then I delivered the final blow. I will not sell our land to developers. Instead, I am establishing the Harlan Veterans Healing Ranch on the full 200 acres. A place where soldiers like me, men and women carrying invisible wounds, can come to heal. Where families can reconnect. Where the lessons of duty include compassion, something you never taught me, Dad. The barn will become a counseling center. The fields will grow food for residents. And your name will live on not as a monument to control, but to redemption. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the invincible colonel finally looking every one of his 80 years. For a long moment, the man who had never shown vulnerability in front of me looked truly afraid. Margaret. His voice was hoarse. You can't do this. That land is mine. I built everything. You built walls, I replied quietly. I'm choosing to build bridges. You wanted me declared incompetent. The court now has all the evidence it needs to see who truly lacks capacity for honest judgment. Judge Anderson adjourned briefly to review the new documents. When he returned, his ruling was swift and decisive. He denied my father's petition, upheld my authority over the estate, and ordered an independent audit of the financial dealings. My father sat motionless as the gavel fell, the sound echoing like a final salute. After the session, he approached me in the hallway as people filed out. The bailiff stayed close, but my father didn't look like he wanted to fight anymore. Up close, I could see the age spots on his hands, the slight tremor in his once steady grip. I never meant for it to go this far, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You were supposed to be stronger than her. Stronger than me. I am, I answered. That's why I'm not destroying you. You can stay on the farm, in the guest house, under supervision. But the decisions will be mine now. This is your chance to finally be the father you never were. He searched my face for the obedient daughter he once controlled. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived wars both overseas and at home. As I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp Iowa afternoon, the wind carrying the distant smell of harvested fields, I felt something I hadn't in decades, peace mixed with sorrow. Revenge wasn't the explosion I once imagined. It was this quiet, methodical justice, the kind that left scars but also opened doors to healing. My father would have to live with the consequences of the empire he built in shadows. I would use that same empire to create light. The years that followed moved with the steady rhythm of Iowa seasons, harsh winters, giving way to tender springs, golden summers, bleeding into harvest autumns. Today, 5 years after that fateful day in the Woodbury County Courthouse, I stood on the wide front porch of the main farmhouse, a mug of strong black coffee warming my hands. The air carried the sweet scent of fresh-cut hay and the faint metallic tang of the American flag snapping gently in the morning breeze. Below me, the Harlan Veterans Healing Ranch stretched across 200 acres of rolling land that had once nearly been lost to bitterness and greed. Laughter rose from the newly built counseling barn where a group of veterans sat in a circle, some still young, others with silver hair like mine. A former Marine sergeant was sharing a story that ended in quiet tears and gentle nods of understanding. Further out in the fields, residents tended the vegetable gardens we had planted together, their hands working the same soil my great-grandfather had cleared. The ranch had become everything my father once claimed to want for the Harlan legacy, only it was built on healing rather than control. My father lived in the remodeled guest house now just 50 yards from the main home. At 85, his once commanding frame had grown frail, his steps slow and deliberate with the help of a cane. The court-mandated supervision had evolved into something quieter, almost gentle. He spent his days sitting on his small porch, watching the activity with a mixture of pride and quiet regret. We rarely spoke of the past in direct terms. Some wounds run too deep for easy words. But on certain evenings when the sun painted the sky in fiery oranges and pinks, he would accept a cup of coffee from me and offer small observations about the land or the veterans. "You did good, Margaret," he said one recent evening, his voice rough with age. His eyes still sharp but softer now met mine. "Better than I would have." I didn't reply immediately. I simply sat beside him, the old wooden swing creaking under our combined weight, the scent of his aftershave, the same one he had worn since Vietnam, mixing with the cool night air. Forgiveness was not a single moment, but a daily choice. I had not forgotten the letters, the sabotage, or the lonely years, but I had chosen not to let hatred define the final chapter of our story. He had lost the power to break me. In return, I gave him the dignity of watching something meaningful grow from the ashes of our conflict. My own children, Sarah and Michael, had slowly returned to my life. At first their visits were cautious, filled with years of resentment for my long absences. But watching me build this place, seeing their mother not as the distant officer but as a woman fighting for something bigger, had begun to bridge the gap. Last month, Sarah brought her 2 young boys to spend the summer. I taught them to fish in the same pond where Ethan and I once played. Michael, now an Army captain himself, saluted me properly during his last visit, something my father had never done. The ranch had grown beyond our small corner of Iowa. We now partnered with VA hospitals across the Midwest, offering programs that combined traditional therapy with the honest work of the land. Men and women who arrived broken found purpose again, planting seeds, caring for horses, or simply sitting on the porch, listening to the wind through the corn. Many told me the place saved them. In truth, building it had saved me. One crisp morning last week, I walked the familiar path to the family cemetery at the edge of the property. My mother's simple headstone sat beside Ethan's. I placed fresh wildflowers on both the purple petals, bright against the gray granite. "I finally understand," I whispered to them. "Honor isn't just about standing tall in uniform. It's about standing up when it matters most at home." As I turned back toward the house, I saw my father watching me from his porch. He raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave, the closest thing to approval I had ever received from him. I waved back. The circle, jagged and painful as it had been, was finally closing. Standing here now, looking out over land that had witnessed 4 generations of Harlans, I realized that revenge, true revenge, was never about destruction. It was about taking back the power to write the ending. My father tried to erase me. Instead, I rewrote our legacy into something that would outlast both of us. The sun climbed higher, warming my face. In the distance, children's laughter mingled with the serious conversations of veterans finding their way home. This was victory, not the kind celebrated with parades and medals, but the quiet, enduring kind that touches lives long after the courtroom drama fades. If my story has touched something in you, I want you to know you are not alone. Whether you are a parent who feels betrayed by your children, a child carrying the weight of a difficult father, or a veteran still fighting battles, no one else can see there is strength in choosing truth over silence and purpose over pain. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight for your dignity within your own family? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Tell me which city or town you're watching from today. Your words remind me that these lessons travel far beyond the Iowa fields. Thank you for sitting with me through this journey. I hope it brought you comfort, strength, or at least the knowledge that even the hardest chapters can lead to beautiful new beginnings. We have many more real-life inspired stories to share with you, stories of courage, redemption, and quiet victories. If this resonated with you, please subscribe and join our community. Together we can keep reminding the world that it is never too late to stand tall, to heal, and to build something better.